With the base address ready, we can now call the URI and pass any remaining parts of the URI. In our case, the full address to retrieve all countries is localhost/API/countries. And how do I know that? Well, that's in the documentation provided by the API creator and which we went over in the previous video. This is important document. Without it, you'd be just guessing what API calls are available to you and how to structure them. So always have the document ready. So as you can see, we still need to pass the word countries to the URI. We could have that in the base address, but like I said, I want to keep the parameters beyond the base address separate. In any case, to make the get API call is very easy. Client object has a method called getAsync, which, as you can easily guess, gets something from the client. And we want to save the result of it in a variable. So I'm going to create a variable and call it response, which is an appropriate name because it will store the response from the API call. So here's my response variable, and we'll go to our client and use the getAsync method, and you can see that it sends a GET request to the specified URI, and that's exactly what we want. And the specified URI is the base address we already have constructed, and that is saved in the base address property of the client. So the client already has that available, so we just need to pass in the rest of the URI, which in this case is simply the word countries. So here I will pass the word countries. So our full address will be http:/localhost/API/countries. Alright, so at this point we just made the first API call. Since this is an async, we're going to wait for it to complete. So we will do response.wait, and it will wait until the task completes. And now, as part of the result object, we have access to the result property in our response. And as the name result implies, this gives us the actual result of the call. So if the call is processed okay, we can get back the data that we requested. So I'll create a variable to store the results in, and of course I'll call it result. And the result of the call is in the response.result property. As you can see, it gets the result value of the task. So here we get the data, and now we grab the result and store it in our variable. So we got the result, and now what? First, we should verify that the call returned a success status code. We of course only want to continue processing the data if any data was actually retrieved. So let's do an if statement, and we will check if the result is returning is success status code, and you can see that's a boolean that gets the value that indicates if the HTTP response was successful. So if the response was successful, we can now process the data. And the data comes from the result variable, which is of type HTTP response message. And this class has an access to content property, which gets the content of the response itself. So I'll create a variable, and I'll call it read task, because we are going to be reading the content of the result. So we'll go to our result dot and use the content, which as you can see is the property that gets or sets the content of the HTTP response message. And the one we want to use is to read the content, so we'll use read as async. Here we got the content, and here we read the content. And what content we want to read? Well, we want to read the list of country DTO. So here we will use the iList, since it's going to be a list, of type country DTO. That is the content that we want to read, and save in our read task. Essentially, this is the list of countries that we retrieve from the API call and now have it in the read task. And because we use the async, I'm going to again use the wait in order to complete the task and wait for the result. So we will have our read task dot wait. Now the read task contains the list of countries DTO, but it also contains many other properties that we are not really interested in, because what we want to return from this method is just the list of all countries. And that was read and stored in the result. So we're going to grab the result property and assign it to our countries list, because that's where the countries list actually resides in the read task variable. So our countries will equal the read task dot result. And you can see it gets the result value of the task. So here we have the list of our countries. And this is what we want to return from this method. But just one more thing, what happens if the API call fails? Well, in that case, we still want to return the list of countries, except this time we want it to be empty. Then, in the controller, we can capture that and process it further. But here we simply want to return a list of countries either in a valid state from our if statement here, or empty one if this never processed, and we just return the list from the declaration here, which means that the list will be empty. So after the using, I'm going to do a return and return the list of countries. Alright, so we just finished our first API method, and we could start creating the rest of them, but before that, let's just actually implement this in our action and then show the result in the view. So this way we can actually see what is happening before we move on and start creating and processing the rest of the APIs for the countries. So in the next video, we'll start working on the action in the countries controller.